What's up, everybody? It's Vince from Crushing Strength Fitness and MMA. Wanted to make a video today talking about injury and staying safe when it comes to, weightlifting and exercise in general. Just to start off here, let's talk about, clips, the weight used on the bar, safety racks. Now, when it comes to clips, it's not too complicated. Just use them. I've definitely used them almost every time. I rarely forget them on any lift, and especially on a deadlift, if you forget to put clips on and you're using a lot of weight, if one plate slides off and offsets the weight on the other side and you start, it starts tipping, that's just an injury waiting to happen. And when it comes to weight on the bar too, it's important to understand that anything less than 3 reps has that inherent risk of being more dangerous for, straining a muscle or having a joint injury. Not to say that that's going to happen every time, but being conditioned for a 1 rep max is so important. There's those 1 rep max calculators. They say your 10 rep max or 3 sets of 10 max is like 70% of what your 1 rep max is. But one thing that's important with that, let's say it's 3 sets of 10 with a 280 pound barbell squat. An important thing to understand though is that while you might get 400 as the number of what that 1 rep max is, that's like at your peak, and your body usually doesn't want to get to that point. It wants to protect itself. It wants to limit force production if it can. That's why when you're sore and you work out, you'll notice that sometimes you're a little bit weaker. You can't put up the same force that you could. It's harder to get a pump. That's the reason, is because your body is always trying to protect itself from doing damage. So there's a reason why powerlifters have that peaking process of having weeks of doing 3 sets of 10 or whatever, or 5 sets of 10, and then as you see them get through the weeks, it drops to 8, 6, 5, and until next thing you know, they're doing 3s and 2s, and sometimes sets of 1 with 90% of their 1 rep max, just to get acclimated to producing max force against the weight. Not to get too complicated with it, but that's an important part of the process. So it's important to understand that. So if you're doing 280 for a set of 10 on a squat, you might get 400 is the 1 rep max. But if you try to just warm up normally and get to 400 without ever training for strength specifically and getting your body adapted to lower reps, you're going to have a really hard time, or you're just not even going to be able to do it. You're going to fail much sooner than 400, and that's completely normal. Now, when it comes to safety racks and stuff, it is so important to use them when you can, if you have it available, because let's say on like a bench press here, having the safety racks like right below where your range of motion cuts off, with my experience with it, is that sometimes it really can't replace the spotter, but sometimes it does make it easier for the spotter to help you out too. It's always important to have a spotter nearby if you're in the gym. There's no reason not to. And also having those safety racks in place is just giving you a good plan B, from my experience at least. Again, this is not advice at all. I'm not, a medical professional. This is just something that I noticed with my own training. Safety racks on squats too. You usually see a lot of people squat outside of the rack because there's this, not really claustrophobia, I think, but I can understand it. You think you need a lot more room than you actually do. And sometimes you'll see those people get into sketchy situations, and sometimes even doing their 1 rep max, which is insane, without a spotter nearby, which, let's get to this whole spotter thing with squats in just a second. But then also just doing it, in the open gym where someone could be walking by, and next thing you know, you have a guy that's like squatting down in a deep squat, and he has to dump that bar behind him, and then there could be a person walking by. It's really unsafe. Usually it's just better just to use the racks. And when it comes to spotting, I've seen plenty of videos where the spotter for a squat is just in the worst position for himself. Having a bar on your back and then a person behind you, and this is usually the technical way too. If you see certain manuals and stuff, they recommend this, where they tell you to kind of get behind the person and spot them from behind like this around their torso. But the question is there, if the person's bailing on the lift and they're gonna dump the bar back, and I've seen a video of this, if I could find it, maybe I'll put it in this video. It might be hard to find at this point though. The bar gets dumped back, and then next thing you know, it's landing on that guy's arms, could break his arms. There was an Olympic weightlifter who used straps while doing the Olympic lifts, and during like a squat jerk or whatever, he wasn't ready for it, but because he was strapped up, if the bar ended up falling on his arms eventually when he went backwards, broke his arms. So that's a risk for when you're having a spotter behind you. There's a reason why at these big competitions, these big powerlifting events, they have several people on one side of the barbell and then another side of the barbell. Just simply because that's a much easier position to get into and protect a person from like danger than to actually get behind them when they're most likely, if they want to, going to dump the bar back. And then next thing you know, it's hitting the guy behind them. So that's just one important thing when it comes to spotting for a squat. As for other lifts, deadlifts, luckily, you don't necessarily need a spotter, because if anything, you could just drop the bar. But one thing that's important for safety on deadlifts, I rarely do low rep sets of deadlifts. I think, and I rarely do conventional at all. I'm not a conventional hater, definitely not. But I just think that there's other ways to reach the goal of strength with deadlifting. But of course, if you're training to get a high 1 rep max deadlift, you're going to have to do a lot of low rep sets of deadlifts in order to see a change and in order to get to your peak. But an important thing with that is like sometimes you just see certain people, they just don't know when to bail on it, because it's one of those lifts that has that security of the bar not crushing you, like on a squat or on a bench press, the bar not getting stuck on you. So sometimes people end up pushing it too far where they're shaking, and the one guy, there's like that famous video in that strongman event of that guy having that nose problem because he was straining so hard trying to do a deadlift. I'm not saying that anyone's going to be doing that kind of deadlift number just showing up to the gym, but it's just worth mentioning that sometimes having less of an inherent risk sometimes could be even more riskier just internally. And also generating long-term fatigue within the week when it comes to training. Not to rant too much about that, but just thought that was worth mentioning. Now, when it comes to joint damage and stuff, this could happen in several different ways. Usually it's because usually the person knows why they might be having a certain joint problem. Maybe they've had it in the past. Maybe it's something they've always had since they were a kid. Maybe they had an injury outside of lifting, doing something else, and that injury causes this problem with a specific lift. But then occasionally you will have certain lifts that do cause some joint damage, but a lot of times, at least in my experience with my own training, finding a way of how can I alleviate this stress, how could I spread it out at least, or what could I do to complement that lift to make sure I'm not getting more damage than I am good from it. A good example of this would be on like tricep extensions. I noticed that when I was always doing heavy tricep extensions 3 days a week, same weight, same sets, same reps every time. First of all, I wasn't progressing, my arms weren't getting bigger, and on top of that, I noticed that I did have a lot of elbow pain when I was doing those that kind of style. And sometimes in training, it's just a simple little tweak, and you end up getting more results and you end up being safer for it. One thing that I did for that, If I were training in the commercial gym a lot more, I probably would be doing a lot of tricep push downs and stuff to complement it, and especially before the extensions. But one thing that I did just to alleviate some of that stress was I would kind of have a light day of tricep extensions, like a medium day, and then a normal 3 sets of 10 day. And of course, having those reps higher helps in general, with being farther away from injury. But I noticed after that happened, those days where I would go super light, on like the light days and stuff, it was not only kind of therapeutic to the elbows because I was pumping a lot of blood through it, and that was like a big thing. It was the fact that I was pumping a lot of blood through the arms. The load wasn't that high, but as long as I was going to failure, which I still do it now, I was fine with that, and my arms grew from it as well. So it was a win-win situation. But honestly, when it comes to joint problems on other lifts, sometimes it's important to just know your own individual limitations and stuff. Just an example for me, I know that if I were still doing just conventional deadlifts flat, no Romanian deadlifts or anything special, I know that my deadlift would still be weak, and my posterior chain would still be weak as well. It's just not something that speaks to me. I had some lower back problems when I was doing it a lot. Nothing too crazy, but it just didn't feel right on my body. And sometimes understanding what lifts just don't work too well for you is really important. It's the same thing with lateral raises for me. I checked videos of myself doing it and haven't had any kind of problems form-wise. Didn't go extremely heavy, but just how it worked out is that in particular the left shoulder joint just didn't like it. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because sometimes that lift that's giving you problems might also end up being your best lift too. So sometimes being able to let it go and say, what's more important to me, getting a higher number of weight on this lift or keeping my joints healthy and safe? Sometimes you just have to know that trade-off. And when it comes to managing recovery, I think a huge thing for managing recovery is time. A lot of the time when I was having certain joint problems, and maybe it wasn't really a joint problem, but I did have a very tight right hip flexor, plus always a lot of pain doing deadlifts while that was happening, even doing rows. Just being in that bent over position where there's a lot of pressure on the hip flexor gave me a lot of problems when I was lifting. But I noticed that one thing that helped was, again, tweaking the program a little. So on my Romanian deadlifts day, I don't really do any kind of heavy rowing after. I try to keep it as light as I can. But then I also know the days where I can go heavy and I can go hard, and I'm fine for it. So understanding that, and then also when I switched to doing, instead of on, off, on, when it came to leg training, going like 2 days off in between, just seemed to work better for me, because I was getting more time away from those movements, more time to do cardio or just to move around and give those joints and those muscles more time to recover. Not only helped my muscle growth in those areas, but also ensured that those joints and those muscles were also staying injury free too. Now there's other ways to go about this too. I usually will put heat on the muscles if they're really sore. I don't think there's anything special about it. It's just something I like to do. Usually a lot of, if I have the time for it, I'll try to do the stretching. I definitely need to do it more though. I definitely slack when it comes to that. Good dynamic stretches, pumping blood through the muscle when you're off. It's just something that I found worked very well for me. And so injuries, definitely a tough topic, and it's definitely a dangerous topic too, because you could be lifting so well for a long time, and there could be something hidden beneath the surface that or maybe you know about it and you're just not putting in the work to correct it or understand why it's happening. And next thing you know, you get this bad injury, and next thing you know, you can't train for months after, which is just so grueling to this whole process. So staying informed on it and just knowing your limits and knowing what you need to change with your own routine to keep yourself safe, and just honestly doing everything right, having a checkbox on everything so that you don't have to look back and think, man, I didn't do this and now I'm injured. I think is so important, just honestly for your sanity as well, if something does unfortunately happen. But yeah, that was the video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope maybe you learned something from it. Again, this isn't advice, just my experience. If you did like the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And until next time, see you later.